Good morning, everybody. I want to take this opportunity to welcome members of the Ministry of Tourism. I also want to welcome the members of the media who are here and members of the public who have taken the time to sit in this meeting. I want to thank you for coming. The purpose of this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee is to examine the issues identified in the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year 2014 with regard to the Ministry of Tourism. As you know, we spent some time engaging the Auditor General and his office on the entire report of 2014. And we did that with the public in mind and also with our own opportunity for education and information gathering, so that we'd have a holistic sense of what happened with regard to government accounts in 2014, and so that the public and citizens of the country would also understand the role of the Auditor General and what these accounts mean and why they are important for citizens to understand what is going on. And today we focus on the Ministry of Tourism. You just happened to be early. There was no specific reason, in the sense that we did not identify you as a high up on the agenda as a priority. What we did is that we tried to look at the accounts as they are, and we wrote to most people inquiring about certain issues, and you were among the first 9 to respond. So we commend you on that. And you then ended up being the first. Okay, so you are here this morning. I want to welcome you. I want to ask you to be at ease, all right, to answer the questions to the best of your ability. We will ask you questions. Some of the questions might be hard questions in keeping with some of the issues that have come up in the Auditor General's report. But all we want is a straightforward answer to the best of your knowledge. And if we probe the issues, we expect you to respond on the basis of saying that, well, this is what your probing question tells me is an appropriate response. And if you do not know, well, then we will ask you to provide the information, okay? Because what we are trying to do is to make sure that we get all the information that is important. All right. So when we have these meetings, and when an institution like yourself, a ministry of government comes, the idea is to hear from you, not just about the issues raised in the Auditor General's office, but if there are challenges that you face, this is the opportunity when you can really bring it to our attention and the public's attention. Because when we are finished with a meeting with you, a report is done. And that report has recommendations. And that recommendation, the report and those recommendations are laid in Parliament. And therefore they come under the scrutiny of Parliament and also for action by the executive, okay? So there is a value in that aspect of it. So you also have a certain amount of freedom and opportunity here. And if there are possible solutions that you wish to identify to any of the problems, and you feel that you have identified these solutions before and they have not been taken seriously, this is also an opportunity for you to do that. All right? Now, what is our job besides insisting on accountability and transparency? Part of it is to help your ministry and any other ministry or government institution improve the delivery of services and to be much more efficient and effective, and to make sure that taxpayers' money, citizens' money, public money, if you want to call it that, is spent in a judicious and restrained but effective manner. Okay? Now, this meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live on Parliament Channel 11 and on Radio 105.5 FM. So what I will do is to begin by asking the members of the Ministry of Tourism who are here to identify themselves and introduce themselves to us and the public. And then we will begin the process of engagement. Okay?
Yes. Thank you. Good morning, Chair. Thanks, members of the committee, for inviting us so early. I am Cecilia Greaves-Smith. I'm the Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Tourism. I will ask the members of my team to identify themselves, starting at that end.
Hi, good morning. My name is Deborah Sukdev. I'm the accountant to Acting.
Good morning. My name is Simone Medina, and I'm the Acting Director of Research and Planning.
Morning. I am Samdi Rampasa, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Tourism.
Good morning. My name is Anand Maraj. I'm the Coordinator, Monitoring and Evaluation at the Ministry of Tourism.
Good morning. I am Himaraji Ramdani, Acting Administrative Officer 4.
Okay, thank you all very much. And on the first occasion and on the second occasion, I asked all members of the committee to introduce themselves, so they are now well known to the public. You know these members as members of Parliament, in both houses, and we are the Public Accounts Committee of the Parliament, basically. And so what I would ask is, Permanent Secretary, if you can give a brief introduction before we start the question.
Well, I'd just like to thank the members of the committee for giving us this opportunity to appear, to address any of the concerns that may have been raised in the Auditor General's report. My team is a little stressed because this is, for most of them, this is their first time. So I beg your indulgence. But we think this is a very important exercise in terms of how ministries are asked to account for how they work. Unfortunately, I joined the ministry only in September of last year. So some of my answers may be premised based on what the records may show or what I have been told by other members of staff. But I endeavor to do my best, and my team, and we endeavor to do our best to answer as best as we can. And in those instances when we cannot, we endeavor to send any information that you may ask of us after.
Okay. Well, I will start off the questions and then other members will engage you. The first thing I would do is, given where we are today at this time, what is the policy, you would say, for tourism, given that this ministry is responsible for tourism? What is the policy for tourism, and how does that fit into the overarching policy framework of government for development? Are you able to articulate? You don't need to go into a big long spiel. If you make a few points, that would be fine.
Well, having regard to the current economic situation in the country, tourism is seen as one of those drivers, so to speak. We are expected to increase our contribution to the country's GDP. The sector is seen as one of those sectors in which you can increase employment, foreign exchange earnings. So how we are working is guided. It is guided by those premises. We have a work plan that has been approved, which has come out of the government's policy framework, which includes looking at means of increasing incentives to increase investments into the sector. We are also looking at quality assurance issues in terms of our tourism products, looking at our hotels, our customer service. We're looking at sites and attractions. How do we provide a better experience for our visitors? We're looking at the question of research to determine how we should go forward in terms of policy making. One of our major projects is our baseline survey, and we're also looking at how do we increase working with the Tobago House of Assembly in terms, because Tobago House of Assembly is responsible for tourism in Tobago,
Yes.
but the product is Trinidad and Tobago. So we are working on how do we make those arrangements, a better working relationship, so that what both parties do would benefit the country, Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay. You mentioned the issue of incentives for investment. How is investment handled? Because, I mean, in a fundamental way, Ministry of Tourism is very focused on how to increase the tourism drive, how to bring more tourists to the country. And there are other agencies that handle the business of investment, which includes tourism investment or hotel investment and so on. How is that? How do you see your role? How do you facilitate that process? How does that work?
Well, the ministry is responsible for the ministry and, by extension, its implementation of the Tourism Development Company is responsible for those incentives that relate to room upgrades for our hotel plans. They actually would accept applications. They would do the necessary checks, balances. People are allowed, hotels, there's some incentive programs which allow hotels to upgrade their rooms and their facilities, and they would either be reimbursed up to a particular amount of money by government. We are responsible to some extent for some of those programs. What we are in the process of doing right now is trying to look at the incentives to see if they are in line with what other countries offer to their sector, so that we are competitive, because one of the complaints I think that tourists have indicated that our plant isn't necessarily up to standards. And right now we're looking at room upgrades and transport facilities, for instance. So we are looking at the Tourism Development Act. We're looking to review the legislation to bring the incentives more in line with what obtains elsewhere. But we also work with Ministry of Trade, who also may have on their cards other incentive products and investment opportunities. So right now it is a work in progress in terms of our incentives.
Okay, you raise the issue of harmonizing strategy between House of Assembly and the Ministry of Tourism in order to have a Trinidad and Tobago tourism achievement focus. I've always had the impression that there have been tensions between the House of Assembly and the Ministry of Tourism in terms of strategy, implementation, and so on. And I've also had the impression that there is also some tension between the ministry on the one hand and the Tourism Development Corporation. Would you like to comment on that and to talk about how this might be more how we might more effectively achieve a national strategy?
I don't want to talk about tension. What I would say is that we have found that there's not enough communication between both parties, Tobago and Trinidad, in terms of some of the strategies. We do work with the THA. Through even the Tourism Development Company, they market both destinations, although the THA is responsible for tourism in Tobago. When they go to their trade fairs, the TDC is responsible for marketing both islands. So I don't know about tension, but I do know that we have been working on the communication process. We have started, well, I don't know if it started, but we are engaged in monthly meetings with the THA to discuss issues relevant to tourism. We've had some difficulties. When we came in, the incentives for room upgrades were not being accessed in Tobago because of the way it was operationalized. We have since had that amended. We have gone to Cabinet, and the process is now easier in Tobago. So I think we have started a process of working together. With TDC, I don't know if it's, I think there's been a issue that over the last couple of years. People have complained that, you know, they may not, the policy, tourism policy, may be changing fairly often. And the relationship between the ministry and TDC may not have been perfect, but I have not found, since I got there, that it has been bad. It hasn't been, and we are working together to find synergies on how we do things well. They know they have to look to us for leadership because we are responsible for policy development, and we know that we have to depend on them for implementation, and it is a work in progress, I think.
Yeah. You see, from my point of view, and this is going to be just a quick comment and you can respond. I mean, the tourism ministry is responsible for policy in the country. Yes, the House of Assembly is responsible for Tobago and all matters related to Tobago, in which tourism is a major matter. But whatever the THA does has to be within the framework of some kind of national policy. And certainly the TDC is the execution arm of the ministry, and therefore it must conform to policy. And the issues need not be disharmonious at all in the execution of their functions, either the THA or the TDC, understanding that there's policy overlap arrangements between the House of Assembly and the Tourism Ministry. But it seems to me that if everybody understands their role and they're working from the same page, even though they're going after very, very specific objectives and targets, a lot more can be achieved. So that was my only concern, and I know it has always been there as a factor, you know. So, if you don't want to comment, that's fine. I'll ask Mr. Samuel to proceed. Huh? No, I always start with you, so I give Mr. Samuel a chance.
Mrs. Greaves-Smith, why do you feel, from the tourism aspect, should somebody want to come to Trinidad and Tobago? Because tourism is for pleasure, travel for pleasure. What are they coming to see? What are they coming to experience? What have we been marketing Trinidad as, if we are marketing it as a tourism destination? What is there for that excites the mind and the appetite of the person who wants a destination to come to Trinidad and Tobago? Seeing that, and I wanted to reiterate, we are the home of Carnival. We say the Mecca. We have no Carnival museums. We are the place for Pan. We have no Pan museums. We are the place of tremendous culture, but we have no cultural museums and stuff like that. So people have nothing to come and see. What is being marketed when it comes to our heritage, physical heritage, built heritage, all the types of heritage? What is there? What are you marketing?
Okay, well, first I'm just going to make a point that we bring tourists here for different reasons, not always just for pleasure. So sometimes we have the business side of things, and Trinidad has done that in terms of conventions and meetings and stuff. But to talk about what we market, depending on who you talk to in meeting with our stakeholders, we get the view that everybody has a different view of what Trinidad and Tobago, what is the experience. And it's really an experience. It's not just that we talk about heritage sites and what are our products. We think that Trinidad and Tobago is an experience. It is it is culture, it is business, it is the people, it is our diversity. Tobago, we see Tobago in terms of leisure, in terms of, well, they said clean, green, and serene, but we look at it as the sun, sea, and sand. People, we market the experience of the Arapita avenues, the street food, those kinds of things. So apart from just a site or a museum or the music, it's really the experience. There's also the question of ecotourism. We're now working on trails, going through certain parts of the North Coast, and it's not just one product that we're doing. Apart from the beaches, it is an experience. We say, you come to Trinidad, we say people made a point that you could go to a river Lime. It is not something that we may sell, but you go to a river Lime and you meet a family there and you're part of an experience because they share their food. You have an experience at the river. It is not just one product. It is one destination, but you have many different experiences. So apart from the basic what people tell you, ecotourism, sports tourism, those things, business tourism, conventions, it is really what we tell people come to Trinidad and Tobago is because we, the people, are our greatest asset in terms of the tourism sector. We have great culture, we have the carnival, yes, but we also have the festivals, we have the Diwalis, we have those other experiences. And to us, that makes up a total package, Trinidad and Tobago. That's the best I could.
We'll go to Member Randall Mitchell. You had a follow-up?
Well, I don't know. I just wait to.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I'm so pleased to have you all here today. But I go right back to the audit report, and there are a number of pervasive issues that were raised that are relevant to your particular ministry, and with regard to lease agreements, register of contracts, contract agreements, contract employment, storage of payment vouchers, a number of issues right across, delays in separation benefits and so on, void checks. So it seems to me that I think I'm making the comment that the ministry has to pay attention to its policies and its procedures having regard to the number of issues that have been raised here. And I know that you all would seek to correct it. However, there are particular matters that I believe that are urgent, and with regard to fraud and losses in particular. We're informed that there were about 12 checks amounting to $844,000 and 74 blank checks which were discovered missing by the ministry now, and that the matter was under investigation. I mean, I know that another report is due soon, and I'm not sure whether I'm hoping that we would be advised that this was all corrected in the audited report of which is due shortly. But perhaps you can speak to the investigation and what this has led to, and also at the same time you can address the matter of the 10 contracts that were not provided for, where payments of $5 million were made at the time of audit. And so I'm saying that there were no contracts for the $5 million which was put out, which is, I think, seems to be contrary to policy. And unless there were clear indications that this was supposed to be done, you know. And of course, and for instance, there was another project as well where there were 4 vouchers totaling almost $2 million relating to this cruise tourism initiative, and the action was in contravention of the Financial Regulations Act, which stipulates that a vote may not be applied to a purpose for which it is not intended. So again, I would want to speak to these particular projects. I mean, I'm very heartened to know that you have an M&E department, a monitoring and evaluation department, and hence I did not expect to find the level of discrepancy that I see here relating to contracts and payment of checks and so on. And again, there were with regard to lifeguard services, you had 5 checks again of $2 million prepared, and at the end of the year, those projects had not been started. So these are general concerns. I question your M&E department and their effectiveness, because this all relates to projects and policies and systems and procedures. So I'd want you to address the general pervasiveness and speak to those specifics with regard to those discrepancies regarding checks and payments which appear to be unauthorized in a number of cases.
Thank you. Well, I'll start with the checks. In 2014, these checks were found to be stolen. The matter is still under investigation by the fraud squad. We've been trying to get in touch with the complainant, and we have been unable to do that. So we have sent correspondence asking what is the status, but we haven't had any word yet. Apparently, there might have been some lapses in in the processes, the financial regulations, in terms of how these checks were stored, how they were disbursed, and we have since taken action to fix those. We now have the unused checks are now stored in fireproof cabinets in a locked, sealed area that you now have to have a security access, a key, swipe, and key to open. The persons who are disbursing the checks now ask for 2 forms of identification. Identifications also copied and kept on file. So access is limited to persons who may have access to these checks. We have installed security cameras within recent time in the areas of the accounts department, so that we have put some things in place to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Now, you may reference the M&E, but in this particular case, this would have been an auditing function, and that is one of the issues that ministries are facing, in that the internal audit function needs to be strengthened in terms of the capacity of the persons who are internal auditors. What we find is persons become internal auditors, you move up to the service, you might be a clerk in an accounts and you move up, but you're not subjected to any specific training, so your competencies in terms of looking at risk in certain areas, you may not know what you're looking for. So what we find is that the audit function needs to be strengthened across the board in the public service. Recently, permanent secretaries, when we were discussing the new procurement legislation, we identified that as one of the issues, one of the critical success factors for the procurement legislation to be properly implemented, is because PSs cannot see everything that happens in the ministries in terms of procurement, so that you have to have a strong internal audit function. And we were discussing issues of qualifications, training in terms of risk management, forensic accounting, and those kinds of issues. In terms of the contract, and as I tell people, when you go from ministry to ministry, you have different ways of doing things. I came from a ministry, if a payment was sent for some works to be done and there was no contract attached, the person in accounts would ask you because they knew that this is something you should have. In this case, they were not contracts per se, but they were awards, letters of awards, because of the, I was told.
Which one are we talking about?
The other 10 contracts that were not provided.
Well, Mrs. Greaves-Smith, before you go too far, you said the complainant, you were trying to get in touch with the complainant.
Yes.
Who is the complainant? I thought the complainant would be the ministry.
I use the word complainant, and maybe it's not complainant. The investigating officers, there are 2, a corporal. A corporal Camacho and a sergeant Dipchan.
You're getting in touch with them?
By telephone, I've talked. We wrote. Just to find out what's the status. As we were coming here, we wanted to know what was the status of the investigation. I couldn't find them. But we will continue to look for them.
Yeah.
And I could let you know what happened. What is the status?
But we would want to be informed.
But it's still under investigation.
The checks were cashed, yes?
I was told that in some instances the checks were cashed.
With regard to all of the blank checks, I mean, have you placed stop checks at the banks, etc.?
All those things were done with the central bank and with Treasury, yes. There have been stop orders made. But the ones that were cashed, they were trying to discover what happened, who might have been the perpetrators, is the best way I could say it.
But won't the cash have been given to somebody by the bank who would have to identify themselves?
Yes.
How hard is that?
Well, I thought it would have been difficult, but apparently it's not so difficult. That's why we started asking for...
How hard is it to find the person who collected the money and who would have had to provide an ID in order to collect the money?
I suppose it might have been a wrong ID they use. It might have been something forged. I don't know. That's why we're asking Fraud Squad to find out what is the status.
You don't know, but you're the chief accounting officer.
Yes. What I'm saying is the checks were not cashed at our office. Some of the checks were cashed at the Treasury Division and some were cashed at a bank.
So, just trying to figure out what happened, right? You're saying that there may be persons out there with the capability of writing checks and persons with your signatures?
No, I'm saying some checks were stolen that were already made out to persons. There were a couple of checks that were made out to certain companies and to certain persons that were stolen from the office.
Okay.
So those checks, from my knowledge, I was told that those were cashed, some at the Treasury and some at banks. The blank checks, I was told that a couple of the blank checks turned up printed under another ministry, the head of another ministry. And that's why I'm saying Fraud Squad has to get involved. I don't have the capacity to investigate that.
Has to get involved, or they are involved?
They are involved. They are involved. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Senator
Chair.
Mahabir.
There are other issues that I want to raise, Mr. Chair, but on this one, I am not very clear with respect to the process within your ministry to safeguard these negotiable instruments like checks and bank drafts. Do you have a safe, one of those Chubb safes that only a couple officers have the combination to, and you would know, therefore, that if it is opened, either two people would have opened it? Shouldn't there be some system like that when you are dealing with large sums of monies? I mean, 844,000 is a significant sum. That as a accounting officer, that you should request that there be a safe at least purchased for your ministry, so that all of these instruments may not only be the financial instruments, but sensitive documents, contracts, and so on, that you have in a secure location, and you are saying you don't have that? Okay, my position is, shouldn't you have it? And shouldn't it have been a priority to safeguard the public's resources in a safe place, so that individuals in your ministry who are not authorized to have receipt of such documents, such instruments, are going to be prevented via having physical access, because you have a couple of officers whose duty is that? I imagine that is how most organizations function.
Yeah.
With respect to sensitive documents, one or two individuals will have the combination to the safe, and a safe should not be an expensive item, especially when it's going to save $844,000. Do you think that that's something, as accounting officer, you would want to implement forthwith?
Okay. What I'm saying is in 2014, it did not exist. We now have a safe that is now
A person with limited access.
Which is now in an enclosed space, in which any access, you must have a swipe so people will know who came in, and you must have keys. So 2 officers, no single officer could go in and access at any one time. That is for the blank checks. For those checks, when when persons come to collect checks, you come to a cubicle. That has been enclosed, and we have security cameras there now, so we can identify who might have collected checks. Anybody collecting a check comes with 2 forms of IDs, and we now copy the IDs and keep it on file. So we have put We
No,
have, sorry.
I think I may not understand clearly one aspect of it. The question of the 12 checks of $844,000, the actual checks went missing. This is
The
my
actual
understanding.
checks.
Or is it that the checks were collected and were actually collected and signed for?
They may have
I'm
been
not sure.
collected and signed for by persons who were not the authorized persons, or in some
No, because
instances.
may, or I'm asking a question.
Sorry,
may,
sorry.
or
They are
will they?
different. All right. 3 of the checks were made out to companies, and a person came in with an ID, and they collected 3 checks for a company. They came to collect checks for these companies, the 3 checks, with an ID, and they were given the checks. Apparently, the person issuing the checks did not take proper information. There was no copy of the ID. There's no real record. I don't recall if they were signed, if there was the person. They said the officer in the schedule said she forgot to let the person sign for the check. Yeah, it sounds, yeah. So that persons collected checks.
Without signing.
Without signing, or maybe without, some of them signed, but they may have been the wrong person. They might have come with IDs that might have been forged.
Just a follow-up question on that. So the person basically receiving the check would have been a citizen, not a public servant?
Well, I don't know.
In some cases.
I don't know. I don't
No,
know.
I want to ask that. That's
Not
important.
necessarily, not somebody who worked in the ministry.
But there would have been a public service breach in not having the proper procedure enforced by having the person sign, taking note of
Yes.
the ID,
Yes,
etc.
yes.
So there were 2 sides of it, so to
Yes,
speak. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, Mrs. Greaves-Smith, I just want to know, you said that you put certain things in place in 2014, 2015, which those things appear to be standard. So what existed prior to 2014? Can you explain the process? And you have $844,000 going missing in 2014. Are there similar instances in 2013, 2012?
Okay, well, all right. I came there in September of last year, so I wouldn't be able to tell you now if it had happened in 2012 or 2013.
Maybe
I can get that to
deputy
you. I can get that to you. But let me tell you what happens. The problem with us, we are in Tower C, in one of those towers. And no. It has been a problem in terms of getting vaults and fireproof cabinets in there. We've been having discussions with Udicot, and one of the issues they discovered, they've told us, is that the load for the capacity of the building, if all these ministries there put in vaults and fireproof cabinets, and depending on where you put it, it may compromise the structural integrity of the building. That's what we were told. We have been, we have been, as a group, the PSs of those ministries that are in those towers have been meeting with Udicot. We're looking at options. In some instances, when we cannot bring in a vault, a big heavy vault, we use fireproof cabinets, and we're told where they must be placed. So I think that is what might have happened in 2014. Yeah, we have since put things in place, but I can't tell you anything about 2012 or 13.
I think what
you will able to say?
The process of by which checks are processed.
Procedures.
Yeah. What is the process by which the checks are processed? I mean, was it in a drawer by somebody's desk? You know, how
Right now it's in an enclosed cubicle.
prior to 2014.
In 14, was it in a closed area?
Who's going to respond?
Prior to 2014, it was in an enclosed cupboard. Yes.
What was the process?
The same process is just that more people had access to the cabinet.
Just as an ordinary cupboard. Just an ordinary cupboard in the account.
A cabinet.
Ordinary cabinet, not fireproof or anything.
Yes, it was a fireproof.
Oh, and persons had access to it.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. But I think
Member for Tobago East. She's been trying for a little while.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So you can ask all your questions, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the checks that were collected, there's a policy and a procedure. An officer did not follow proper policy and procedure. What disciplinary actions were taken as one, and two, what measures have been put in place to ensure that policies and procedures are always followed within your ministry?
I've been advised that the officer who was on the schedule at that time resigned from the service. So, matter of disciplinary procedures, well, I don't know if it's, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I was told the person resigned.
Is there, just a follow-up to that, is there any chance, that's why I asked the question of whether the person receiving the money was a citizen, not a public servant, and whether the flow was a public servant. Is there any reason to believe that there was complicity in this involving both parties?
I prefer not to say, Chair, sorry.
Okay, Madam PS.
But as I said, sorry, as I said, the process now is a little more stringent. So persons assigned that responsibility. If you are given 10 checks today, you have to sign for those 10 checks. You have responsibility for those 10 checks. You are in an enclosed area in which other persons do not have access. You are to ensure that both the person whoever comes for a check comes with two forms of ID. If you're coming from a company, you come with a letter from the company, and sometimes, depending on the size of the check, we may actually, I have been told, they actually seek to confirm with the company that this person is here to collect a particular check. So they have introduced some more stringent measures.
Okay, thanks, PS. The other question, in your response to a question from Member Gopi School, you noted that internal audit is a weakness and is common throughout ministries. What steps have you taken at your ministry to strengthen your internal audit process?
Well, we are looking at the question of training. We were looking at the question of we only have two persons in our internal audit unit, an auditor one and an auditor assistant. At the time, we were looking at strengthening the numbers we had, because what we found is that we had lifeguards under us, a lot of daily paid work, and it meant that the auditors were really involved with checking pay sheets for lifeguards, the daily pays, which took a lot of work. So it means you couldn't focus on some of the other areas. With the new dispensation, lifeguard is no longer us. So we're not looking so much in terms of numbers, but what we're looking in terms of capacity. Unfortunately for us, our internal auditor is close to retirement. I think she might be going off next month. What we're seeking is see if we could influence who is the person who might be replacing her, and we're looking at some training opportunities. We were trying to do it in terms of the public service, so that because we found that it's something that is across the board. But we in the ministry are looking at some training opportunities when we get our replacement. When I came there and I got the audit report, the work plan for my auditor, I looked at it and I saw that there were some areas in which we were not checking at all. We were not checking inventory, we were not checking stores. Auditing was really focusing on pay record cards and salaries and arrears, but the processes, nobody looks at how we do procurement, how the tendering process is done. And to some extent, although my M&E officer can do that, to my mind, the internal auditor is to look at the processes to see what risk they might have been able to identify that the way we issue checks, is subject to, somebody coming and doing exactly what happened. But we are seeking to strengthen the function, the audit function.
Okay, Senator Henry, Senator Mahabi, I'll ask you to follow, so if you want to, right?
Yes, morning. Maybe my question might be more appropriate to Mr.
Sure.
Maraj, because I know one of the concerns that the Prime Minister has stated recently is that what do we really get when we spend money on advertising and promoting? And I think, what type of systems are in place to really monitor whether we get value for money from our investment in tourism promotion.
Thank you, Member. Through Mr. Chairman, the mandate of the Monitoring and Evaluation Unit of the Ministry should develop, implement, and maintain a results-based monitoring and evaluation system, which is designed really to ensure that the Ministry's policies and programs achieve government policy and national outcomes. In terms of the system, we look at 4 key areas. One is activity and output monitoring, financial analysis, outcome evaluations, and policy and compliance. Each one of those, we have different indicators we track with specific reference to our marketing expenditure and investment. We look at the impact on visitor arrivals, on visitor spend, as opposed to the average marketing expenditure per visitor. We look at total occupancy, investment, foreign direct investment in the sector. In terms of issues of compliance, we look at things like cash flows, decisions at the board level of our implementation agency, implementation rates, as opposed to executing projects and delays in terms of time and cost and so on. Sure.
Okay, but is there do you have at least one specific example of a program or project that you could give us to say, well, we tried this project and it did work or it didn't work? It doesn't matter whether
yes, sure.
But at least give us a better idea.
Sure. I'll cite one project under the Ministry, under the Tourism Development Company, which I think is harder to measure, but you actually saw results. As you know, attitudinal change is one of the biggest, I would say, challenges in terms of an outcome in a specific program. Under the TDC, we have a program called STAR, which looks at training persons to improve service in the way they deliver service. We had an issue between the period 2011 to 12, where visitors complained bitterly about the service meted out to them by our immigration and customs persons. And they were able to take part in this program. Subsequent to that, our comments from our visitors showed that there was a decrease in the number of complaints from visitors with respect to immigration persons and the way that they train them. So you saw...
What you said, take part in the program. Could you be a little more specific?
Sure.
What did
STAR stands for Service, Training, Attitude, Response, I think is the acronym. I could be corrected on that. It takes you through a series of programs, a series of modules, which looks at improving your attitude towards your customer and the way that you offer service. So it's a module that is executed under the project. They go out to national agencies, hotels, restaurants, and so on, and they train staff in the way of service delivery. Within the program itself, there's also a monitoring and evaluation mechanism where they have mystery shoppers who would come and test the way people service and so on.
And this was done by staff in the ministry or consultants?
No, the survey was done by the CSO. The training was done by the Tourism Development Company. They have a unit set up there with specific responsibility for staff.
Okay. Javier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On a slightly different angle, and it's taking off from my earlier question. The question is this. In this committee, we are told that things in the public service or outcomes in the public service take a little slower to be realized than in the private sector because the public servant is bound to follow regulations and that he must comply with the regulations. And that would then account for why pensions take so long to be finalized and payments can be in excess of 3 months, whereas in the private sector it can be shorter. However, in the Auditor General's report, we are told that a register of contracts, as required by Financial Regulation 129.1, was not produced for audit. it meant that there are officers in your ministry who are not following the regulations that they are duty-bound to follow according to civil service custom and practice. My question is, what is the penalty for a public officer identified or public officers identified by the Auditor General by not following regulations, stated regulations, so that there will be a change of behavior in the future, so that these regulations will be complied with? Because a register of contracts as required by Financial Regulation 129 was not produced for audit. Did anyone experience some adverse consequence as a account of this negligence in your ministry?
Firstly, I have to advise that although the report says it was not produced, I think, I have been advised that a contract register did exist. However, it existed in it's done on a computer, but it's not recognized in the government's way of auditing. But yes, but I get your point that sanctions don't really apply for persons who don't always follow the regulation.
Okay, so that we have a situation where the public servant is hiding behind regulations to explain his tardiness. And when he does not follow regulations, he is not sanctioned. So this seems to be a big problem that we have to address as a society. You cannot, on the one hand, tell me that the reason you are slow to process my pension check is that you are following regulations, and then when the Auditor General says another set of public servants have not followed regulations, there is absolutely no penalty or sanction. So this seems to be a pervasive problem, not only in your ministry. This seems to be a pervasive problem because, again, we have on inventory control, regulation, financial regulation, stores 102 was not followed. And then we had, according to financial regulation, 55 stores that items were not properly tagged. So it seems as though if there is a breach of these regulations, and it seems to be pervasive, not only in your ministry, across all ministries. So you are a permanent secretary of long experience. Do you think that this is a matter that we need to be looking at carefully to ensure that there are at least penalties so that errant public officers will know that they will be brought to book when they violate the regulations that they use to protect themselves for inefficiency? I'm speaking to you as an experienced permanent secretary.
Okay, well, in my experience, I agree with you that sanctions do not apply in some instances. I think we need to look at the public service and look at the legislative framework that governs the public service. People say it is outdated, it needs to be modernized. Some of us argue that there are things there in which you can sanction persons, but enough isn't done. The performance management system doesn't work the way it's supposed to work. People are moved around in ministries, so by the time you're ready you're working with a person, by the time you get them to they are aware of what they're supposed to do, they're moved to another ministry. So the service really needs some work. That is the best I will do. And I agree with you that enough sanctions do not apply because for various reasons, we can't say there isn't a disciplinary procedure because there is. But I don't think enough of us take advantage of it.
Senator Samuel, MP Webster Roy, MP Senator Paula Gopi-Schoon, and then Senator Member Randall Mitchell. You had an immediate follow-up? Yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry, just last question on this. I want you to tell me if you agree that the permanent secretary at the time would have had supervision, charge and control of the ministry. And following these losses, the permanent secretary should be pecuniarily responsible for these losses. You agree?
That's a difficult one. the role of the permanent secretary as accounting officer makes her responsible, but to the extent that she becomes pecuniary responsible, it's very difficult to see.
So, does that create a situation where, in practice, in the public service, although, I mean, people are deemed to be accountable or accounting officer, etc., that it really is very, very difficult to enforce the issue of accountability? I'm talking to you now in the context of your own experience. Either by habit or by practice or by convention or whatever.
That's a difficult one, because permanent secretaries are accountable, yes, but sometimes they don't have, control over some of the situations which they work. So, for instance, she's in a building where she cannot put in a vault, and so she cannot take certain actions to do, she has persons assigned to her who comes from the service commission. She's not in control of the person's capacity, competency. I mean, she can do training, but there are some things outside of the control of the permanent secretary, and that makes it a little difficult. Yes.
She's in control of the systems and procedures.
She should be in control.
Where the systems and procedures are not followed, she should be responsible.
Ultimately responsible. And PSS have labored this point. We have called the Auditor General into our PSS board meeting to discuss some of the issues that are raised in the Auditor General's report, for which permanent secretaries sometimes have no control. For instance, we are asked about leases for properties or buildings that are rented by ministries. But that is outside of the control of that particular ministry. It is with another ministry, and that ministry also has to depend on the Attorney General. So we are mentioning Auditor General's report, but it's outside of your, control. So you are told that you are accountable on one hand, but you really don't have the full, you're not given the tools or the capacity, I suppose, to really be in control or accountable.
Amil?
Does the ministry have a framework for executing internal audits? And if so, who prepares, who does the annual work plan, and what does it contain?
Annual work plan is done by the auditor, and it is done in consultation with the PS, the permanent secretary. So she will do a work plan and say, this is what I plan to do for the year, and it is usually broken down in quarters, and it will go to the permanent secretary, and usually there's some discussion as to what the permanent secretary may see areas in which she thinks they must be focused, which is what as I said, when I first came in, and the first one that came to me, the first quarterly work plan that came to me, I recognized there were issues that I felt needed to be addressed, so I asked the auditor if she could include it into the work plan. So it's really done by the auditor in consultation with her permanent secretary. Permanent secretary, in my mind, with the ultimate responsibility of what is to be done.
Follow up on that. If that's the case, what period in the financial year did the ministry realize, I mean, you were not there, that checks were missing? There were difficulties in accounting for certain things. If it's a quarterly situation that is taking place, so at what period in the particular year were these checks realized missing?
Do you have that information, Debbie? But it wasn't reported by the auditor. Apparently, the report was done in November of 2014, which would have been the beginning of financial year 2015. And I don't have the information, but I don't know if it was picked up by the auditor or if it was just the accounts unit determined that this had happened. You see, that is the difficulty. Depending on how robust your audit function is, it might have been picked up before. I don't know. I'll have to be able to check and then tell you.
So, is it possible then that in the future, audit needs to be very, very careful as to the parameters of their operations and look into the matters in the quarters and be thorough, as opposed to just, as you said, auditing in specific areas and leaving other things out. I think something to look at.
Yeah, I agree with you. The focus has been on the dollar figure things, these salaries, the arrears and stuff, but there are also other issues that are very important that we need to have the auditors see it as important, because he or she, the eyes and ears of the permanent secretary outside, the permanent secretary can't possibly see everything that happens, and she depends on the internal audit to raise the issues.
Okay, MP Webster, right?
I want to raise an issue that is very dear to my heart, and that's delays in provision of separation and pension benefits. I noted in the Auditor General's report that you would have reported 90% of your pension and leave records were completed, right? I want to know if your process is now fully complete. No?
Hardly.
I would like to say yes, but it actually is no, because that small amount of pension and leave matters that are outstanding, because of the way the system works, we can't complete ours in some instances unless the previous ministry completes theirs. If a person came from another ministry, that ministry has to do that part of it and then send it to us. So the few that we have outstanding are based on those other ministries not submitting their documents to us. So we are on top of those which we have control. But there are a couple of them that we are waiting on other ministries to advise us on the pension leave for the persons while they were there, and then we will do our part.
Those that you're on top of, as you said, what is the average time frame for payout?
Well, that is I can't say offhand, because that's usually dependent on controller. I have been told that controller has a backlog. Since I've been there, I haven't had anybody retire on me, so I can't say.
But the ministry should actively follow up.
But we actively follow up before the person goes off on pre-retirement leave. I have noted that we send in the documents, we do the pension leave records, we send everything. So I have seen instances where there have been queries that might have resulted in some delays, but we're usually on top of those things. I am soon to go whenever, so I am inclined towards ensuring that persons who retire get their benefits. And if it is the ministry needs to do something, my inclination is that it should be done. And usually I place high emphasis on that.
Okay.
Senator Gopiskun.
Thank you. I just want to go back to two matters which I had raised and perhaps escaped us. And with regard to the 10 contracts which were not provided, for which payments totaling $6 million were made at the time of the audit, what's the status of those contracts? Were they found? And what were those contracts for? Were the projects in fact executed? Because it appears that the payments were made, and I would believe the checks were encashed. So the status of the contracts and the status of the projects, and also with regard to the lifeguard services projects for which checks were prepared for $2 million as well, and the projects had not yet started. In the interest of the final outcome, were those projects completed, right? And the contracts provided, the actual contract documents.
As I noted, there were no contracts done. What I have seen going through the records, there were award of contracts. There were letters of award, yes. No actual contracts, letters of award with the scope. And I have been advised all the projects have been completed. There were projects dealing with the lifeguard quarters, lifeguard facilities at Maracas, Las Cuevas, Destiny. So the works have been, and Toku, the works have been completed.
In both instances?
In all the instances of the no contract.
The 10 contracts, but you said letters of award, but that's not enough.
Yeah,
the contracts have to be done.
Yes.
Since
I have come there, I have not done any contracts, so I haven't done any. But the instructions are that there must be contracts. There must be contracts if we are going to get a service provider to do something. There is the understanding that there must be a contract in place
before the payment.
Before the payment.
So there's a proper system in place. All of the connected parties understand the system as well. And
what I discovered is that what was set up to deal with some of these issues, the permanent secretary before I got there. She set up a PS's tenders committee, a group of persons from the ministry with responsibilities whenever we're going out to tender for service or for equipment or anything. These people take responsibility to ensure the process is done properly, that the tendering process is done, RFPs, the tender boxes, the evaluation. So they have, in a sense, she has put something in place to ensure that the process is done the way it is supposed to be done.
Yeah. No, I'm so concerned about the systems, the lack of systems in the ministry. And I know also that the ministry would have oversight of what goes on in TDC. My concern is whether or not those systems are in place in TDC as well, with regard to contracts, payments, all of the pervasive errors that we're speaking of, whether those are in place in TDC, whether or not there is proper oversight by the ministry, whether or not you get monthly records from the TDC as well, minutes of meetings, so you're aware of what contracts were issued or intended to be issued, and that all of the systems because obviously there's a problem in the ministry. And if you have oversight responsibility, we want to know that all that you're responsible for has been extended to the TDC as well. Can you speak to that and give us some assurances?
Yes, thank you. We have a very robust monitoring and evaluation of TDC, headed by the Deputy Permanent Secretary. Before any releases are done, they submit to us their monthly expenditure reports. And no money is released if there are any queries in terms of what they plan to do or what they might have done in the last month. We look at their project documents, the same sort of sending reports to us in terms of status of reports. We do PSIP projects for which they have responsibility. Our research and planning unit has oversight in a sense. They will go, they'll do site visits. We look at their statements to determine whether they're doing what they're supposed to do. My M&E officer also has, they've done templates in which they're supposed to fill information out based on his 4 areas. So in terms of project spend, in terms of balance of expenditure, percentage of work done. We have, in instances where we have queries, we may not I do not release funds unless I am satisfied that what the explanation that is given to me is correct. We have, since I have come there, I have been asking for the minutes of meetings, as they should be sending to us based on the performance manual for state enterprises, and I have been receiving. I go through these things, if only to see what is happening and see whether they have board approvals for certain things. So I'm not saying that it is perfect yet, because we're working with them. We have regular monthly meetings to go through their projects and what their challenges and issues may be. We've been asking us, for instance, if they have the tendering process, if they have some capacity, they can sit on our evaluation committees, and we have that relationship where both parties are involved in whatever it is that TDC is doing. So far, I think we have things in place.
Just one follow-up. But does TDC have a strategic plan?
TDC, within the last couple of months, they have been looking at a review of their strategic plan. So they started a conversation. They've developed a strategic framework, and which actually gives key indicators to show whether they are successful between this year and I think 2020, I'm not sure. So they've set up indicators like percentage of visitors, arrivals, the spend, the increase on tourism's input into the government's GDP. So, and I know that they're now getting to the point where they're taking it out to stakeholders, and they'll be trying to do it through, to save time and monies and, value for money. We're trying to do it through the Standing Committee for Sustainable Tourism, because we have a stakeholders forum that is involved, and we're taking the framework there, and it will be fleshed out. We should have something within the next couple of months.
You had a question? Yes, Senator Henry. And then I want to do some sort of summary questions just to sort of bring us up to date on the issues that we have addressed here so that we can have a sense of where we are with some of these. Okay.
There was supposed to be a major renovation upgrade taking place at Maracas Beach. Is that under the Ministry of Tourism? Could you give us some kind of update on the status of that project and where, the contractor and what are the issues?
The last status report on the project, that is the Maracas project, the beach facilities. The last status we have is that 30% of the work has been completed. The project had some difficulties. It was supposed to have been completed in January of 2016. There have been the contractors had some challenges, including it was a design-build arrangement, so there were some difficulties with respect to the design. They were supposed to put in a new wastewater system, so there were some issues in terms of the works to be done. We have had some difficulties also in terms of getting our necessary approvals. There have not been any commission of state land for a little while, and they needed state land's approval for certain things. They have been having some difficulties with some approvals for the road works because you have to divert the main road behind where the booths are, and that would include approvals from Highways Division and those things.
So the project was started without any of these approvals?
Well, they had approval from the EMA. They had approvals for certain things. It's just that some things there were no approvals for. Sorry.
Okay,
Seems like some major things to me. Well,
but it appears that now that things have happened, the contractor has given the undertaking that work will start to speed up. So he's at 30% completion, and there's a new completion date. I'm not quite sure what it is yet.
A summary position on a few things. With regard to the checks in which there are instances clearly of fraudulent activity, that matter is under investigation.
Fraud squad, yes.
The public servant involved has resigned. And did the company get its money or did someone divert the funds to himself or herself and the company was not paid? Is that the case? Is that the situation?
My understanding is that the persons who collected the checks had nothing to do with the company.
With the company,
right.
so
that is my understanding.
So there were people.
And replacement checks were done to the
right.
company.
I just wanted to clarify that. Then the second thing is that you're saying in terms of safeguards now, you now have a safe and you now have a system in which certain security arrangements have been made, including more than one person being necessary to execute these things. And you're saying that in addition to that, you have the combination of both signature as well as swipe, all right, in order to deal with that. So that particular challenge has been addressed. The second issue that was raised had to do with the award of contracts. You said all of those awards, in fact, were executed and completed. And the award process, I think I heard you say that it followed a certain procedure, and that was a procedure appropriate to the ministry. Is that correct, under the permanent secretary?
What I've been advised that the procedure used for receiving the service providers, they used the tree quotation because of the amount of the award. So there was a process.
I know the system, yes. So, okay, so basically it was appropriate. And these awards were given what, by the permanent secretary or some ministerially responsible person, is that correct?
The letters of award was signed by the PS, the permanent secretary.
Okay, so this is how that was executed, and it was based on the system of 3 submissions, and award was given based on the 3 submissions. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
All right. I just wanted to clarify that. The other thing that I want to raise is issue of systems in the ministry. I think Mrs. Gopi Skoon raised that issue. And it seems to me, and this is something that we discussed prior to coming here to the this public session, that the Ministry of Tourism is a relatively small ministry. And you have some controls in the ministry that really do not seem to function adequately. And it has serious implications for a large public service and larger ministries. And are you saying, for instance, with the audit function, that is now being addressed? It is clear that you have addressed some of the processes and some of the systems, but is the audit function going to be strengthened? Is there a plan for that? Is that going to be done in the ministry? Because that seems to me like a fundamental issue. Because you see, I sense two things about what is happening. One is that I sense that in some of departments, some units, departments of the ministry, there is a lack of clarity about what to do and how to do it. And I also sense that it may well be an issue where individuals do not precisely understand what their job is and what the accountability requirements are. You know, I'm asking for your opinion.
I agree with you that the audit function in the public service needs to be strengthened. As I said, we are hoping, as I said, for instance, when my person goes next month, I have no control over who I get, because that person comes through service commissions. So I will have to put some training mechanism in place to ensure that this person is aware of what they should be looking for. But as I said, we have discussed it at the level of the Ministry of Finance when we were looking at the procurement legislation, and I know that they were looking at it across the public service per se in terms of strengthening that function. So it also, I suppose, what I can do in my little corner of the woods, I say look at the work plan that is presented to me to ensure that it doesn't, that it's not just looking at the dollars and cents of salaries and arrays of salaries, but it also looks at other areas that are sometimes neglected, which is where, so the processes, the systems that are in place. How do I get my auditor to understand that this is also a function of the audit unit?
Okay.
No?
One final thing. What, in terms of the administrative reports and audit reports for your ministry, are those up to date?
Sorry, my administrative report for 2014 had gone to Cabinet just before September of last year and was returned to us by Cabinet. And we have resubmitted it to Cabinet, and it is now, I was told, before FNGP.
Okay.
Yes.
And what about the audit reports?
Yes.
They are up to date?
Yes. Well, audit reports? For us?
Yes.
Well, right now the Auditor General is at the ministry looking at our 2015.
Right, okay. Huh? What about TDC?
TDC's 2014 report is in the ministry. We have done a draft cabinet notice on its way. We hope to get it to cabinet next week.
Okay.
Their audited reports, I think they're now working on 2014. They're up to date up to 13, I was told.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you get a letter from the secretary of this committee asking that all audit reports be brought up to date and forwarded to the Auditor General for his scrutiny?
I don't recall I got it. Okay.
Huh? Okay. Did you?
I don't recall.
You don't recall that?
No.
Okay.
You could resend me. You could resend me. But we have asked them because since we're now sending in their 2014 report, we wanted to have the audited reports. But what they have given us is just a balance sheet.
All right. Senator Mahabir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to shift gears a bit because for the past little while we have been focusing on micro issues, the issues of procurement and internal audits and so on. But what I'd like to raise now is this. We are in an environment where the country has recognized that the agriculture sector, manufacturing, and tourism must now contribute in a more meaningful way to the national income and the foreign exchange earnings of Trinidad and Tobago. The fact is, we were there before. In the 1990s, we developed the agency called the TIDCO, Tourism and Industrial Development Company, which was charged with expanding the tourism sector. There was a tourism master plan, and then it appears as though for 20 years, the tourism sector, together with agriculture, stagnated and manufacturing. What I'd like to know from the officials at the ministry is whether, given the low contribution now, and I'd like you to indicate to the public what is the contribution to the GDP of tourism at this time, and what is your target with respect to the contribution over the next 5 years of the tourism sector. And in addition to that target, because without a target, you won't know whether you're succeeding or not in discharging the public function, public purpose. What is your current allocation from the Ministry of Finance to run your ministry on an annual basis?
Okay. We in the ministry recognize the importance placed right now in the tourism sector in the diversification of the economy, having regard to our economic circumstances. And all our strategies are geared with that in mind. That is what we have in mind. Right now, according to the records of the ministry, tourism sector contributes 3% of GDP. To the extent, is that from CSO?
World Tourism.
Okay,
Travel.
and that is from World Tourism Organized Travel. What we have discovered here is that some of the research to tell us tourism's contribution is not, we don't have it necessarily done here. We are in the process of doing a baseline survey to determine, to set baseline data for which we could now be able to measure spend and employment, business expenditure too. We have some areas that we're looking at that we're going to measure now so that we could see how we do in the future. The strategic framework that was developed recently by the TDC, they're looking at a 7% contribution to GDP within the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, that's very interesting. That's a number, but really, are there any concrete proposals, projects, or strategies that they would implement on a quarter-by-quarter basis so you can measure how well you are progressing to achieve that 5% or 7% figure? It is, I mean, the population ought to know that tourism and travel is the world's largest industry. And Trinidad and Tobago, in relation to our CARICOM partners, the Barbados, St. Kitts, Nevis, Anguilla, we are not really holding our own. And therefore, it must be of concern to the planners that there are things we need to do. There are certain strategies and plans we need to implement. Could you give us an indication briefly as to how we could achieve the 7% over a 5-year period?
Well, TDC is our implementing arm, and they're now that they have determined their strategic framework, they're now looking at strategies to which to attain the 7%. What they've been looking at new markets. Some of the traditional markets are not doing as well as they should, so they're looking at new markets. There has been some focus in terms of different types of tourism. Apart from sports tourism, we've been hearing things like medical tourism. So they have not yet developed their strategies to get to the 7%. This is something that is going to be worked on with input from their stakeholders. Tourism, to a large extent, implemented by their stakeholders, the tour operators, the hoteliers. So the strategies are to be developed in conjunction with our stakeholders, and this is something that we're working on. Sorry.
Could I ask you 3 quick questions that are much more immediate? Will all our major beaches be patrolled, for instance, over the Easter weekend that is coming by lifeguards and so on.
Now, lifeguards now under Ministry of National Security.
So
I
that,
may not be able
so
to.
how
But
is
they
that?
should.
Is that better for you or what? I mean, isn't this?
I heard there was rejoicing when they were moved, but so I don't know. I never had
Okay.
responsibility for
So
that.
that is a question we must ask the Ministry of
National Security. But as far as I'm aware, they should be on the beaches with
All
Easter.
right. Now, in the immediate short term, what will you say by the end of September 2016 that in the area of tourism we will have achieved as a country, or you will have achieved as a ministry? And let me take that one further. Would you have an idea of what you are planning to achieve by September 2017? Because this is important if you are going to achieve anything resembling 7% going forward.
Yes, and it's very difficult for me to say right here now. We hope by September of 2016 that we see an increase in arrivals. We've been looking at airlift, for instance. We're looking at our diaspora outside to work more with the persons we have out there to help us in terms of arrivals. We're looking at new markets. Some of the traditional European markets, we going past those. We're looking at recently Tobago just got a new, I think Condo is bringing another flight to Tobago. So we're looking at, in terms of increased airlift, increased spend by visitors who come here. But I don't have for you exactly what the strategies are.
Let's assume that one of the things that you want to achieve is increased visitor arrivals. All right, so you have a target for that, you want to achieve that. The second thing would be, would some things be like developing the products in Trinidad and Tobago, whether it is conferences or whether it is a heritage site or whatever it is. Would that be part of it? And what about the issue of investment? Is that part of the target as well in tourism?
Yes, and investment, looking at our tourism products, including sites and attractions, yes. We have been a little constrained because of our 7% reduction in some of our estimates. But we still have the Sugar Heritage on our books. We're looking at the Sugar Heritage site in terms of heritage, in terms of investment, in terms of public-private partnering.
Well, I saw in the list that was listed as a completed project.
That was completed as the master plan, I think. That part was completed. But we now have a master plan, and we now is a project that spans more than one ministry, about 3 ministries. There's the museum, and there's a sports part of it, and there are some heritage sites. So that as a matter of fact, today was a day when we were supposed to go site visits to look at who would do what, So we are looking at products. The Maracas project is supposed to make Maracas work better, less traffic, those things.
The Manzanilla project, that was not under your ministry, that was a Ministry of Works project?
Works, yes.
Okay. All right. Member for San Fernando East.
Yeah, I wanted...
Then member for Tobago.
PS, I wanted to ask you about the strategies with respect to our own local tourism, internal tourism. And I see that as low-hanging fruit. We keep hearing that Tobago is underutilized, underaccessed by Trinidadians. What are the strategies that you have to develop or even stimulate that internal tourism?
One of the difficulties we've had with local tourism in terms of Tobago has to do with getting to Tobago. So for instance, what we've been told by the Tobago hoteliers is that persons find it easier to get to Barbados on an Easter weekend, for instance, or one of those high traffic
But that shouldn't be, right?
It shouldn't. It shouldn't. So we've just set up our standing committee on sustainable tourism. On the committee, we have brought in persons who are instrumental in getting things done, which in this case it includes airport authority, it includes port authority in terms of ferry service, and we have co-opted people like Carl to be able to look at the question of airlift. So we have recognized, because we have listened to our stakeholders in Tobago who've commented that the Tobago market is not as robust as it used to be. We need to do some work on it. So, but what we found is that it's a question of how do you get Tobago on those periods when you want to. That has been the greater. The products in terms of offerings for Tobago, the beaches. Tobago has those things that Trinidadians go to. We're also looking at festivals locally. How do we take advantage of the blue food and the like jazz festival is coming? And what we found is a lot of people, I have spoken to a couple of people who would say that jazz will be a problem because they're not sure if they're going to get there, and if they get there, if they're going to get back. So airlift is
Can we use bigger planes?
Well, I was told that the cost of putting a bigger plane there, and here is also not good for the plane if it's those short trips. There are lots of reasons. So it's just to find some solution.
And I have one more question, and it's going back to the uncomfortable issues of the contracts. With respect to the letters of award, so I imagine that the process would be that someone is successful at a tender, they get a letter of award, and they are given a mobilization fee. But a letter of award cannot comprise all the terms and conditions of the contract. So by the time the ministry disburses the mobilization fee, the ministry's hands are tied in terms of reducing to, or even agreeing to the terms and conditions of the contract. So I'm thinking that a contract should be drafted and executed before any fees are handed over, mobilization or otherwise.
I agree with you. A letter of award is a basic, you have been successful at the contract, this with the scope and stuff, and really you need the contract that fleshes out what your implementation schedule is like, how the payments are done and stuff. And we recognize that it's important that it is done, but I can't say why it didn't.
But have you experienced any situation where a contractor would now not agree, or there would be some further negotiations as to the terms and conditions of the contract after the mobilization fee would have been given? In terms of schedules and so on.
I haven't met, but sometimes contractors will come to you and there may be something that happened and he may not be able to deliver the contract on time, and there's some negotiation that happens. I have not been privy to that in this ministry.
Okay, Senator Samuel.
In your assessment of the tourism market, what do you think accounts for the shortfall in tourist arrivals in Trinidad and Tobago? 2, as you plan for the future, have you taken into account that there is a possibility that there'll be a lifting of the embargo on Cuba and the impact that may have on tourism in Trinidad and Tobago? And what has that done for us in our preparation and our plans? Are we thinking outside of the box now? Because the lifting of the embargo in Cuba will now shift a lot of stuff and draw down even further on the limited arrivals in Trinidad and Tobago. What's going through your minds as a ministry, you as well as TDC, to deal with this in the future?
With respect to Cuba, we recognize the impact Cuba can have on our market. And in discussions with TDC, one of the things they're looking at is looking at how we could include Cuba into how we could work with the Cuban market to get persons to sell packages, in a sense, so you can experience Cuba and Trinidad. The difficulty with Trinidad is that we're so far down, on the island chain. So, but forget it? They're not going to take us on.
Realistically, it's like a similar project. It's like a similar product. I mean, it's going to be very hard And when Cuba opens up, you're talking about a country that has been closed to the world for so long. The experiences to be gathered there is, I mean, we have to do other things. You know, I came down from London the other evening, and there were about 40 or 50 people that were coming to St. Lucia from Iceland. You know, I mean, clearly the St. Lucians understand something. So, I mean, we need to what you were saying before, that you have tourism such as conference tourism, festival tourism, let's say, you know. The problem with the Tobago Jazz Festival, in my estimation, is that it's not a jazz festival. You see, that's part of the problem. But we have Pan-Jazz in Trinidad that could be a real jazz festival because it's international in scope. But these things have to be marketed, they have to be targeted, they have to be listed with the jazz festivals of the world, and so on, you know. So I think that there's a certain meticulousness required for tourism that requires a certain kind of knowledge, information, and sophistication that somehow we've been missing. I do agree the big issues are important. Airlift is important. The fact that you have planes, you know where they're coming from, you market to those destinations. But I think that we can do other things, and we need to be a lot smarter in what we do.
I agree with you, Chair. And it is a challenge that we in the ministry have put out to TDC, and right now the Standing Committee on Sustainable Tourism has subcommittees that are working and looking at the destination management and the marketing strategies. It was one thing with tourism, they've had many reports on many things in tourism, and some of these reports, some of the recommendations have not been implemented, and we're looking at all those recommendations to see if some of those are feasible, having regard to what is happening now, and whether they can reap some rewards for us. So we are working on those.
Okay, we are going to go until 12:30, or sooner than that if the questions finish before 12:30, but I'm not going to go later than 12:30. Senator Samuel is next, and then MP Ayanna Webster Roy. With a question. Yeah.
The first question that I asked was, what do you think accounts for the shortfall? Secondly, and my last visit to Cuba, my understanding was that in a few years prior to our visit last year, you had some 2 million tourist visits to Cuba in a short space, in a few years. And that says a lot in a nation that has an embargo. So what do you think accounts for the shortfall? Is it that we are going along the same old road, thinking about the same old things and not thinking broader and not really exercising our thought processes enough significantly around the tourism sector to really, really draw people to Trinidad and Tobago? That's why I started my first question.
Okay, what would have been the reasons for the shortfalls? I've been advised that we've lost some airlift in terms of some of the European markets, some of those European, you have to have planes to bring people. And we're so far down the ladder that people stop off in St. Lucia or Barbados. Although we've been trying to work with crews to increase our cruise arrivals, we have suffered an airlift. I think there have been some other issues in terms of maybe the branding, maybe our marketing has not been on spot. I will accept that. We have looked at niches, but to the extent that we have been successful in some of these niche markets, it's questionable. What are the reasons? Generally, the tourism sector in the Caribbean has been doing fairly well, and we hope if we look at our products and we look at our plant and we do some improvement and we look at our marketing strategy, that we could do better. But Cuba will be a serious issue for us within the next.
We thought about firing some people and finding new minds.
No comment, sorry.
MP Webster, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to the Maracas project. I wanted to know what was the initial cost for the project, if you have any cost overruns, and what's the total to date?
So far, no cost overruns. As I said, the project is only 30% certified completed works. The original cost was 120 million. Yeah, of which we've only paid 25, which was the mobilization fee. We have not paid any to date.
Anybody else? Other questions?
Yeah, I would like to raise a question that no one would like to raise. And that is an unpleasant question, and that is, we have had negative travel advisories against Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the high level of crime in the country. We have to address it. We have had high-profile murders in Tobago against visitors. We have had recently a Japanese pan player who was murdered, and we have not yet found the murderer. These things are not really positive image builders for Trinidad and Tobago. To what extent do you think that the high incidence of criminality is currently and will in the future impede our ability to achieve that 7% contribution to the gross domestic product in the country?
I was hoping you would, I hope nobody would raise that part of it. It's like the elephant in the room. But yes, we think the criminal activities, especially those against tourists, especially in the Tobago setting, may have some negative impact. But I have an officer here who said when they were doing their exit interviews with visitors, and they were asked what were some of the important issues to them, and crime was number 4 on the list, actually. What was the first one? Infrastructure was major. So, but we do accept that crime is an issue. The ministry is working with TDC and the standing committee to introduce what has been introduced in Tobago, the policing, the tourism policing element. Yeah. So that what we found is that tourists go to places where they're criminal, but it's sometimes how it's dealt with. We have a strong media here. Things are on the front page all the time. And sometimes what the tourists experience, if something happens, might negatively impact how that person presents their stay here. So we apart from the policing element, we're also looking at the visitor management system. So if something happens, if there's a challenge, there's a process in place where the person can speak to, if it is crisis management is what they call it. The TDC visited Bahamas recently to look at their system, and we're looking at how we can maybe implement it in Trinidad to make just to try and deal with some of the negative issues. But we accept that it could be a negative factor.
Interested in solutions, for example, with respect to the cruise ship arrival visitors in Port of Spain. Do you have a collaborative relationship between the tourism ministry and the police so that you will have plainclothes policemen at the same time mixing and mingling with the crowd? Do you, as in the case of Barbados, have beach police who are patrolling the beaches where the tourists tend to frequent so that they can blend in with the crowd and keep an eye out on the potential troublemakers? Do you have that kind of arrangement with the security forces so that we could at least minimize the incidents? Or is it that you're still planning on this kind of process?
That will encompass the tourism policing strategy, if that's what we want to call it. To a large extent, it is not a matter of norm. If we have something happening, we will inform the police that this is happening. We have visitor guides who are around Port of Spain to interact with the persons who are coming off the cruise ships, that are supposed to tell you where not to go and advise you on where's the best place you should move. So, but we are working with respect to the tourism policing unit. It's not yet fleshed out, but it is something in train.
All right, thank you very much. There's one issue that in the summary I forgot to mention, and that had to do with the payment that was made that was used for a purpose for which it was not appropriated, right? And how was that addressed by the ministry afterwards?
This has to do with the cruise initiative, and it was being paid under publicity and promotions when really it encompassed some construction type work. We subsequently went to Cabinet and got covering approval for the expenditure, and the amounts was adjusted by the Ministry of Finance based on a request from us. It was adjusted in our financial statement. So it was eventually, in a sense, under the correct vote. It was paid on the correct vote.
So basically, it was money spent without permission, but for an appropriate purpose.
It was money for a purpose that was voted under the wrong vote. It really should not have been promotion and publicity.
Okay.
But we eventually went to Cabinet, got covering approval, and the monies, it was adjusted on our financial statement, is now under the correct vote, which was the cruise ship initiative.
Okay. And I have a list of the projects from 2014, and I see that most of the projects came in within budget.
Yes.
But a lot of them, on the basis of the information I have here,
Not completed.
are ongoing. Can you tell me if most of these have now been completed? The only one I have here that was completed is the Sugar Heritage Village and Museum.
Which was
but
in
what about the lifeguard facilities? You said it was
Were completed.
Then the tourism sites and attractions upgrade. I imagine these
Those are
beaches-
ongoing. We have
these
different
are
sites.
ongoing. But you're making good progress with that? Maracas Beach, you told us the situation with that. Then cruise tourism initiative, what's happening? Because I see most of the money allocated was spent.
That is to upgrade the Port Authority quayside.
Yes.
So because when the cruise ship comes in, the place was really very unsightly, and we're supposed to do some additional work there now.
Will that remain under budget?
We hope. Yeah, it should.
Okay. I see you've already spent close to, you only have 200,000, less than that to go.
But these figures would have been for 2014. So
Okay.
the
So you
more
would have
we
had
could
new
submit.
appropriations.
Yes.
What about the Saline Bay facilities at Tobago? Is that still a project?
No, that is off. No, it's
Only
off
65
our books. Off our books.
Off your books. TTT, Trinidad and Tobago Convention Bureau program, is that still on?
That's still ongoing. That is almost recurrent.
All right, okay. Well, the incentive program, upgrade
That is
program, I
ongoing.
understand. Las Cuevas Beach enhancement.
The blue flag we have attained blue flag status, and we're now seeking to extend. So for this year, we're extending, we're doing some additional works.
Okay, Vecini Beach, well, that must be completed by now? Yes. Is it?
That particular part was, yes.
Yeah, because, I mean, I went there and I must say that it's significantly
Good.
improved from how I remember
Yeah.
a few years ago. Okay. Well, I wouldn't bother with the rest, except the really important one at the end, tourism safety and security. I don't know what you're doing with that. I must say that I have always, and this is not just for tourism, because I think it's bad when you when you do something for tourism, but you don't take your local population into account. But I do believe that we can develop in Trinidad and Tobago the concept of safe zones, which have developed elsewhere. And a safe zone concept could cover, for instance, Maracas Bay. It could also cover the major malls in the country, for instance. It could cover major sites and locations to which people go, because our tourism is a little different. Our tourism is not an enclave tourism. It's a mixed tourism in which our population mixes with the rest of the population, mixes with the tourists. So I think if we had a concept of safe zones and we manage that well, and the connectivity between the safe zones and the rest of the society, I think we could really, improve the safety conditions in the country for everybody, even though you know that there is a problem of drugs and crime and gangs and things like that. Those elements can be contained, So it's something you might want to work with the National Security Ministry with an understanding that you cannot do it for tourists alone, because you will defeat the purpose if you do that.
Good, Chair.
Okay, any other questions from any other members of the panel? One more.
Yeah, just one more question. I know Mr. Maraj spoke about the STAR program, but is there any duplication with respect to I know we have a hospitality institute. Aren't they in charge of training people to improve service standards and so on?
Right. So first of all, there was a consideration by the leadership of the Tourism Development Company at one time to transfer the STAR program to TTHCI, because there is some overlap. Where there is some difference is the fact that TTHCI turns out persons who work in industry and therefore also service is part of it. What STAR does is target people who may not have gone to TTHDI, but who exist in the service industry in any case. In doing the tourism baseline survey, one of the things that we've recognized is we've never identified what are primary tourism businesses, as opposed to those who will tell you that what they do impacts on tourism. So for instance, a farmer will tell you he's part of tourism because he supplies Hyatt with food. So that project now seeks to identify a primary tourism population base in terms of businesses and accommodation, restaurants, artisans, ground transportation. And so what STAR does, it attempts to train people in existing businesses that are there who would not have necessarily gone to TTHCI. But I take your point, there is some overlap, and there is a consideration that perhaps there should be a merging of the two.
I want to thank you very much for attending and for addressing all the questions we asked. I think that you have been very, very forthright in your approach. You have given us the information you have, and you have identified some of the challenges that you have in the ministry, which might well be associated with the entire public service system. And we appreciate the fact that you see tourism as a very important industry and development base for Trinidad and Tobago, and that you are trying to diversify your markets and increase your airlift and to set targets. But I think we have to note that, it does require some kind of dedicated effort. In my estimation, I think that the time is long past to have tourism targets for the country. The time has come for targets by product. So, if you have a product and you're selling that, you must know what the target is for that, for the year or for the month or whatever it is, or for the period that it is, like for Carnival. But, we're very, very, we alert to the fact that you are conscious of what is required and that we need to do more, and we proceed. We are satisfied with the answers to the questions that were raised by the Auditor General. I think all of us would be a little disturbed about the situation where a ministry could be defrauded. And while we understand what took place, I mean, really, we cannot have a situation like that in the country, in the governmental system, you know. But we are heartened by the fact that you have taken measures to address those issues and to basically gain greater control. The audit function within your ministry is a matter I think you should address with urgency. Is very important. And we will take the verbatim notes out of this meeting, and out of that extract recommendations that we can make, which we will share with the rest of Parliament, so that your time and your effort here will not go to waste. Okay? Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Chair. And we will take the suggestions that we've been afforded on board. Thank you.